Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. It is a very hot day. I'm basically melting right now. Also, I don't have a lot of battery left for my camera, and I am asking myself, is this a great moment to film a video? And it's probably not, but we're still gonna do it. And today I want to talk to you about series that I think are not good if you marathon read them. Now, one thing about my channel is that I wanted to stand for marathon reading series because that is something I absolutely love to do. And I already did a recommendation video on series where I think they are extremely good if you marathon read them. So I will link that video at the end if you want to check that one out. But today I thought we'd do the opposite, and I want to talk about some series where I think they're actually more enjoyable if you have a little bit of time before each installment. And that can have very different reasons that we will get into when we start talking about these individual series. I have 9 to talk about today, and I would love to hear if you have series where you think it is better to read them separately and not like marathon read them all together, and why you think that is. I would love to hear about that. So let's get into these 9 series very quickly before my battery runs out. So the first one is a series that I read last year. It is the Athena Club series. The original title of the series is very long, so I only called it the Athena Club series. But with this series, I just found that it is too repetitive to enjoy like all at once for me. There's also not a lot of character development, so I feel like having a lot of time between the installments, you don't really miss out on anything. Because what I like about marathon reading a series is like really getting into these characters, really understanding them on a deeper level, then also diving into the world a lot more. But with this series, I think none of these things are very important. They're much more plot driven and fun, and yeah, for me it just didn't work reading them very closely together because I just got so bored with the way they were told. It was also a little bit gimmicky the way it is written, because basically one of the characters is the author of the book. You're kind of reading a manuscript, and then you have the comments of the other characters in between. And so yeah, that was quite fun for a while, but I think if you read them all together, it just gets very annoying at some point and doesn't really add a lot anymore. Next up with this one, I think I would have enjoyed it more spread out. I read them very close together. I did not marathon read them per se, but still very close together. And that is the Dandelion Dynasty series. Now, this series consists of massive books. So the amount of time you need to read them all at once is very daunting for sure. And I think that especially the first book stands so well on its own. So if I would ever reread, I think I would only reread the first book, to be honest. And then with the other books, they are more like a trilogy, because then the plot is like very it runs through the rest of the book basically. So I think with these, because they are so massive, it is good to read a little bit in between. And then at the same time, I think these things that happen in the series are so horrible and distressing that you might need breaks from it. At least I did. I found it so distressing and depressing, and yeah, it was just so much content-wise. The one thing I can say about this is that if you need a cute baking contest in the middle of one of your books, so it is bearable for your readers, that says a lot about the things that are going on in your book. So yeah, I would recommend taking it a little bit more slowly with this series and taking some breaks just for your mental health. Next we have the Temperance Brennan series. Now this is a little bit different because it's not a fantasy series. This is kind of a crime novel series that inspired the TV show Bones. It is very different, but you still have that aspect of like solving individual cases in the books, and then you have more of a character storyline that runs through the individual books and like relationships that develop and stuff like that. But I think because it has this like solving crime aspect, like reading those back to back would probably get repetitive, and I think with these like crime series it is better to read them more individually. Then we have the Lady Janies series. Now this is a series that is chronically underrated. I think the first book is getting a little bit more hype right now because it has the new Amazon Prime TV show. I have still not watched that one, but I do really enjoy the book series. But the thing about the books is that they are not connected in any way. So the only thing that is similar is the author trio, and that they focus on like Janes. And then later on we have the series about the Marys. So basically with these you don't have to read them all together because they're really not that connected. And at the same time, I think the writing style and the humor would get very overwhelming if you read those back to back to back, because they are written in a very unique style and the humor is very unique as well. I absolutely love it, but I think reading one of these books a year is like the perfect amount for me personally. Next up with this one, I have to say I've only read the first 2 books, so this might change if you get further into this series, but that would be the Singing Hills series. This is a series of novellas that have like this storytelling aspect to this. So basically you have a cleric who goes around collecting stories, and in these novellas you get the individual stories that they collect. And so I think this works really well whenever you feel like something like fairy tale-esque and magical in between other books. You can just pick up one of these novellas. So far that has worked really well for me, but I also really need to get into the 3rd novella for sure by now. Another series that isn't really that connected, there are like some connections, but I think it is very good to have some time between the 2 installments, is the Innis Lear series. So basically what we have is one very big novel, and then we have a second very big novel that is a prequel to that, I think. Or a sequel? No, it is a sequel. Yeah, it is later in the timeline. But they are kind of like retellings. The first one is a retelling of King Lear. Now, I'm not a Shakespeare expert at all, but this series is very special, but it is very slow fantasy. It is very epic, very slow, very character driven, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, but I think reading both of these books back to back would not be a good experience because, you know, in between you just need something fast-paced to just pick you back up a little bit again, because they are set like very far apart historically, I think, as well. It's totally fine to read them separately. This is probably similar to the Priory of the Orange Tree duology, whatever it's called right now, but since I haven't read the second book yet, or the prequel yet, I can't really talk about it here, but I would imagine it is very similar to that. Then we have a YA kind of fantasy series, and that is A Song Below Water. With this one we do have 2 books, but they focus on different main characters and they are kind of telling the story from 2 different sides, because the second book follows kind of the like villain, the nemesis of the first book, of the main character of the first book. And with that we do get very different dynamics, very different stories. I really enjoyed both of them. I actually liked the second book a lot more, but because we follow different characters, I think they refer back a little bit in the second book to things that happened at the end of the first book, but it's not like you need to immediately dive into the sequel with that one. It's completely fine to just leave a little bit of time and kind of accept that you will see a character you already know a little bit from a completely different side in that one. Then we have a little duology of kind of like short stories, and this is Blackout and Whiteout. I think you could probably read them all together, but one is set during a summer heat blackout and one is set during a winter whiteout. So reading one in the summer and one in the winter works definitely best for me personally, because I am a seasonal reader and because they are so similar in their structure that they're basically like short stories that get connected by one kind of story arc. I think it works really well to not marathon read them back to back, but read them in their individual seasons. And last but not least, this is not necessarily a series I would recommend, and I stopped reading it after the first trilogy. I know they did more books in that, but it always felt a little bit gimmicky to me, and that is the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, whatever it's called, series. As I said, I read the first trilogy and I did enjoy it to some extent, but I felt like these books were quite dense and the whole like picture gimmick really only worked with the first book for me. Now with these books, it always took me a long time to get into the books, and then they would only get interesting in like the last third or something. So I think if I had read them back to back, I would have struggled so much and probably just given up in the middle, because it is easier to get through one book that you're not extremely obsessed with at a time, but reading like 3 in a row can be really hard. So I would not read those like back to back to back. But maybe if I had, my experience would have been different. Who knows? So these are the series I wanted to talk to you about today. I would love to hear your thoughts on them, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye!